Carl, thank you, and thank you for your service in law enforcement all through the years, and also for your service now at MAD, and thanks for also sharing your personal story about losing your daughter. It's one thing to talk about the concept of collaboration, but it's a completely different thing to successfully bring groups together to make it happen. Our next speaker, Professor Larry Schooler, is a senior fellow at the Annette Strauss Institute for Civic Life at the University of Texas in Austin. Hook 'em horns. And he helps governments and other, oh, come on now. Come on. I know. My son's an Aggie, so there we go. I do have an Aggie in the family. So anyway, he helps governments and other organizations that want to engage the public to become more effective and efficient collaborators. He's a former reporter for National Public Radio, and he's the author of a new book coming out soon. So please welcome Larry Schooler.
Hey, good morning. That was horrendous. Good morning. There's engagement in my title, so I have to engage you. Okay? And I don't ask rhetorical questions. Okay? It's really an honor to be on this program. To Mr. McDonald, thank you for your work. Sorry for your loss. It's also a privilege to be on a program with my good friend, Austin Police Chief Art Acevedo, and in particular to be on a program with a couple of heroes in Sean and Jenny, who I know we'll hear from later today. Thank you all very much for what you're doing. I appreciate it. All right, stand up, please. Now, remain standing if you are looking forward to lunch, which coincidentally is at the conclusion of my presentation. Okay? Remain standing if you deal with the public, the general public. Remain standing if you have ever in your career found it frustrating to deal with the general public. Remain standing if you believe, as I think you do, that the issues we're talking about today are urgent and have to be resolved now. And remain standing if you think the public might be able to play a role in helping us resolve this issue now. Please be seated. This may or may not disappoint you. I'm not going to talk very much about drunk driving or impaired driving. Thanks to the law enforcement in this room and thanks to God, I've never been directly impacted by drunk driving or impaired driving. What I know something about is engaging the public. I work for the city of Austin. Has anyone heard of? There were some catcalls with UT, so I wasn't sure if folks had heard of it. City of Austin? Yes? You've heard of the city of Austin? So the city of Austin has put a premium, a very high priority, on involving the public and enabling them to affect decisions that affect them. Let me say that one more time. Enabling the public to affect decisions that affect them. So what we're going to talk about today is finding ways to involve the public in the kinds of decisions that we all are making to combat what I think we would all agree is a scourge of humankind. Am I right? So this takes a little bit of guts, and in my opinion, it takes a little bit of shamelessness. Raise your hand if you're a fan of the musician on the left, one William Joel I. Yeah, not surprising. How about the gentleman on the right? Friends in low places, yeah. It's a little early in the morning to sing, so I won't. But there are a couple of lyrics in this pretty popular song back in the 1990s that really resonate with me when I think about engagement and dealing with thorny issues. I don't have the power now, but I don't want it anyhow, so I gotta let it go. That's gotta, by the way, not have to or need to or anything like that. And thought I'd never compromise, oh, but you convinced me otherwise. Any married people in the room? Married? So when it comes to I don't have the power now, but I don't want it anyhow, so I gotta let it go, do we have any elected officials in the room? Didn't think so. The fact of the matter is that we can either give the public the bully pulpit, or they're going to bully their way onto the pulpit. Am I right about that? That sounded like a yes. Am I right about that? And the pulpit isn't just right here, is it? It's not just physical anymore, is it? There's a pulpit this morning. It's called #TXDWI Summit. Am I right? That's a pulpit now. So if we don't let the public have access to this bully pulpit, they're going to bully their way onto the pulpit. So we got to figure out a way to productively and powerfully and prudently bring the public into this conversation. But when it comes to thinking I'd never compromise, oh, but you convinced me otherwise, a lot of times when I think about what Mr. McDonald was talking about in terms of advocating for change at the state level, we're dealing with sides that often have entrenched positions. And for whatever reason, feelings of hostility towards those other groups and viewpoints that they're going up against. So we need to figure out a way to convene these folks that's going to lead to civil dialogue, possible collaboration, and that overused term, win-win solutions that are based on their underlying interests. Now, what do I mean when I say interests? Okay. My position is hook 'em horns. Right? Boo. Go ahead, boo. You can boo. So we're against each other in that sense, right? We got some folks in the room that are for them, some are against them, right? That's a position. But I love football. That's my underlying interest. I love football. How are we doing on that one? All right, we're in Texas. So my underlying interest is seeing some good football, which is hard to come by in Austin these days, but that's another story. My underlying interest is seeing a good game. The underlying interest, I think, of all the parties in this conversation is having a safe Texas, of keeping innocent people from dying, one way or the other. So we got to figure out a way to make this conversation about that and get all the relevant players around the table to talk about that and not hold firm to their position on whether or not a car should have a device in it or whether or not a sobriety checkpoint should be set up. So what this is really about is something fairly simple and straightforward. It's about involving the public and public policy. Rocket science, right? But getting all of the affected stakeholders around the table. Having Sean be at the table. Having people who have direct experience with this issue be seated at the table with people expected to make decisions about it. Especially those people who may be hard to reach. I don't know if you all have ever gone to public meetings before, but we have, in most communities, what I would call super citizens. All right? These are folks who manage to make it to every single meeting. Bless their... So we got to reach out much further than just putting a sign up, say, come to a meeting. We got to find the people who we need to engage, who have a deep stake in what it is that we're doing. So sometimes senior citizens are easy to get because they're retired, but other times they have a hard time getting around. We need to help them get here. We need to help the disabled. That's physical and mentally disabled. Most of us live in cities now that have large populations of folks who don't feel most comfortable in English, right? Raise your hand if that's the case. You live in a city where you have folks who don't feel necessarily super comfortable in English, but they may have something to say. So we need to figure out a way to make this accessible to them. We've been talking about young adults all morning. Well, young adults aren't coming to meetings. Why? They got homework. They got dating. They've got resume building. But they will tweet, won't they? They will post to Facebook, won't they? And they'll do a whole bunch of other stuff that I don't even know the name of, won't they? So it doesn't mean we can't engage them. It just means we need to break outside the box a little bit. And when it comes to low-income Texans, these folks sometimes have 2 jobs, 3 jobs. And they don't have a car. I have news for you. How many people here got here by their own personal vehicle? A lot of us. A lot of folks in Texas don't have that. So it's hard for them to get to a meeting that they've got to take 2 or 3 buses and spend 2 hours each way getting there. But that doesn't mean they don't have input, that they don't have something to say. So there's this concept floating around in my field known as civic fusion. And it's a little bit hard to see this graphic, but you'll, I believe, have these slides available to you. And if not, you can Google the concept. But civic, of course, refers to citizens or representatives of citizens who have an intimate knowledge and wisdom of a conflict as the result of living it and some sort of interest to motivate them to do something about it. And by the way, when I say citizens, I'm not talking about legal status. Everybody clear on that? Not interested in that discussion for this purpose. I'm talking about anybody who lives in this state or in this country. Fusion, for those of you who studied science, I studied it, I just didn't really get it. Science informs this notion of fusion with protons that are being brought together closely enough that they overcome their polarization. They are brought together to the same table. It is real easy to shoot bows and arrows at somebody when you're not in the same room with them. I guarantee you that it's real hard to attack Chief Acevedo when you're sitting across the table from him. But people poke fun at him all the time on social media, do they not? Mm-hmm. So it's those circumstances where we can get parties to sit down in good faith at the same table and the same discussion where something remarkable happens. All that lofty extremist rhetoric starts to fade away. And now it's, if you'll forgive me, Art and Larry. Not the big bad police and the I don't know what I am, the softy neutral mediator guy, whatever. So the point is that when you bring these parties that seem like they're going to be super polarized together and you bring them together for a good faith process of conversation, some remarkable things can happen. So you need to have a roadmap in order for this to happen. This is a map of a process that we used in Chelsea, Massachusetts, where they had to literally redraw their entire city charter. Now, we're not talking about that level of policy change in this conversation, but what I want you to notice is this is kind of complicated. What they did was they had some community meetings at the beginning, then they had a team that sat down at a single table together. That led to a draft charter that they took back to the public, and then they put it on the ballot. The point of this is, don't just assume this can happen with one good meeting. You need a bunch of different avenues to be able to engage the public in order to get them on board with what it is that you're trying to propose. Now, in this particular case, this was an example of making rules regarding worker safety standards for construction cranes. So they put everybody who might have a vested interest in that around the same table with the neutral third party. And they said, guys, we need to figure this out, guys and gals. We need to figure this out. And it's only going to work if we can all come to consensus. Because if any of the parties don't like it, well, they're going to go up to Capitol Hill and they're going to complain and the whole thing's going to bog down. So we need to come up with a process by which we can understand what each person cares about, find some common ground, brainstorm some solutions, and then pick solutions that are going to work for all of us. So basically, here are the conditions that we need. The status quo is unsustainable. Is that true in this case? I hear yes. Yes? All right. Status quo is unsustainable, and I think what we've been talking about all day is collaboration, that none of us in this room can solely solve this, right? Okay. Past efforts to solve the problem, I think failed is a little strong. We've obviously done some good work, as Mr. McDonald and others have talked about, but we're not quite there yet, are we? Not quite there yet. And it could be that people need some sort of forum, this being one of them, to understand their differences and build an agreement that encompasses those differences. We're not all going to agree on everything. We just need to agree on enough that we can get something done. Now, I want to talk about different ways that people engage, and I've been referencing this several times in this presentation. Not everybody that cares about an issue that affects all of us in the state are going to sit down at the same table. But there's this remarkable thing about technology, which is that with the press of a button, suddenly I can reach 1 million people, 10 million people, 20 million people. Today, I can guarantee you that there's someone in Singapore or Vienna, Austria, who's going to tweet at #TXDWI Summit. Isn't that outrageous? Amazing? What we know about technology as it relates to engaging people is most folks are already online somewhere, or they have access to a phone. Could be a house phone, could be a cell phone. And so what we're looking for is a way to give them a chance to engage that they don't have a lot of time, they don't have a lot of resources, they don't want to get up and speak. Obviously, this applies to me. And they lack the means or the resources to show up to a face-to-face meeting. So what we know about technology use right now is that there are more than 25% of Americans who have no internet access at the house, but 70% do. 90% of American adults have a cell phone, which opens up a lot of possibilities if we can find ways to let them text to us, but only 58% have a smartphone with internet access. So we have to find ways to engage them that don't require access to the internet. And I love this last statistic. It probably applies to some of the folks in this room because I've been looking around. Can you live without your cell phone? Apparently, almost a third of us say no. So what does this look like when we put it together? One of the things that's remarkable and sort of underutilized in our cities today is the existence of a dedicated television channel to serve the needs of government agencies. Right? How many people live in a city that has a government access TV channel? Raise your hand. Okay. They're pretty ubiquitous. They're required by law, from what I understand. But for a lot of these stations, what we're doing is we're just rebroadcasting the city council or rebroadcasting the school board. It's like a C-SPAN for local issues. We're not doing anything with it like you would on NBC or CBS or ABC. Well, in Austin, we are. If you haven't already seen it, there's a remarkable video produced by the City of Austin's channel called Shattered Dreams. Anybody heard of it? Anybody seen it? You need to watch it. It is an incredibly powerful and moving simulation of what happens in the event of impaired driving. And that was produced by government television. And you wouldn't know it to watch it. I think it may have gotten an Emmy recently. So what the station can do is produce material at a lot cheaper than it would cost to air something commercially, to run an ad during the Super Bowl or what have you, that still gets to folks, not just over the television, but over the internet. The City of Austin's channel, the City of Austin's TV station has a YouTube channel. So it's very easy for us to circulate the videos that we're producing via YouTube and other social media so that they reach much larger audiences than those who are sitting there watching the programming on the channel. Although I do have to tell you all something funny. We have a news program called City View that airs on this channel, and one day I was getting my coffee and a man came up to me and said, "Hey, City View!" Celebrity. But let me tell you about something else we're doing with our television channel. So the picture you see on the right, apologies for the hair day, is from a televised community meeting. This one happened to be about our transit initiative, which is on the ballot today. So if we had a typical community meeting, we would get a crowd smaller than this, typically. So what we did was we said, fine, let's televise it and stream it on our government channel. Let's open up 2 toll-free phone numbers, one in English and one in Spanish. Let's create a text message-driven polling platform, and let's create a Twitter hashtag. So instead of 60 people at this meeting, I had about 6,000. Now imagine what would happen if you had 6,000 people weighing in on this issue. Imagine. It wouldn't be a couple of lonely voices traipsing around the Capitol trying to get legislators' attention. No, it would be a rally. It would be a movement. And this doesn't cost a lot of money to do. This is something that we can do with essentially existing resources that are available in our communities. We just have to think outside the box. I want to credit Chief Acevedo's department for being very forward-thinking as it relates to social media in terms of crisis response. This clip from Twitter is taken during the Halloween floods in Southeast Austin of a year ago. As you can see, this woman tweeted her address to be rescued. So let's not sit here and make fun of Twitter and say, oh, that's for the kids, okay? That's for them to horse around. This is for us to use to combat this issue, to engage in a one-to-one conversation with anyone who wants to around how we're going to fix this. This is a tweet directly to the city. Similarly, when Chief Acevedo's department unfortunately had to respond to a terrible accident, terrible wreck during South by Southwest, someone tweeted their willingness to serve as a witness. CNN, I have a producer who works for CNN, said they found out about the wreck via Twitter. So let's find ways to deliver succinct messages and ask succinct questions of people on Twitter, whether it's using a hashtag TXDWI Summit or Stop Drunk Driving or some other suffix that can get this conversation to balloon beyond just the people in this room. The city has embraced anonymous tips via text message. There's also an organization out of New York City known as HeartGov, where you can text a keyword to their phone number, and then it spits you back questions that it wants you to respond to. So it's a way of gauging public sentiment around something strictly via text message. These are becoming more and more popular across the country. I'm embarrassing Chief Acevedo today with all these slides, but there is a new social media platform, maybe a little less familiar to folks, known as Nextdoor. And Nextdoor enables folks to focus exclusively on content relevant to their neighborhood. In other words, you can only sign up for a forum based on it authenticating that you live where you say you live. And the reason this is significant is because the challenge with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all these other sites is that it's kind of a mess, isn't it? It's hard to cut through, wow, I just won a point on Farmville. Wow, I just went to the mall. Hey, alert, we've got a situation. Hi, I just broke up with my girlfriend. It's a little hard to find the irrelevant information. Well, Nextdoor cuts through a lot of that to enable you to hear just what you need to hear. So a law enforcement agency can do very hand-to-hand work with individual neighborhoods as well as blast to all neighborhoods at once to be able to get important messages out. Now, surveys have become something that a lot of people think are yesterday's news, but surveys are changing, okay? This platform comes from an organization called MetroQuest, Metro and then Quest. And their supposition is basically this, that it's one thing just to ask someone an abstract question, like, are you for or against laws against drunk driving? Which is a question you could ask. But what this does is enable you to show folks how different scenarios or different choices score on different metrics. So in other words, you're not just getting information based on someone's spur-of-the-moment reflex reaction, but instead you're getting someone's reasoned judgment based on some data. And this is available to be utilized on an iPad, on an iPhone, even on a kiosk that you could permanently put in a hot part of your community. You could stick it there and have it be there permanently so that you weren't just getting input occasionally on a website, but you were getting it permanently via an affixed kiosk in your area. So this could be a way to gauge how important a priority it is for your community to tackle this issue. Now, from time to time, public meetings are held where items are going to be approved, whether it's by the legislature or by individual city councils. And unfortunately, the way these things are set up, partly because of law, is that we give pretty much whoever signs up their 3 minutes. Well, see, here's the problem. First of all, not many of us have 10 hours to spare to talk for 3 minutes. Am I right? I guess a lot of people in this room do. Am I right about that? So what we're hearing from is this very, very, very select few number of folks who, A, have all that time to spare, B, feel confident enough to make a speech in public, which, by the way, is not a particularly widespread phenomenon, C, are willing to take a stand on an issue publicly and on television that might alienate them from some of their friends and neighbors, and so on and so on. It's an incredibly skewed sample of public opinion when an item is coming up for a vote. So a platform like e-comment is interesting because what it does essentially is when the agenda goes up, and the agenda has to go up a certain number of days in advance, folks can go online and make comments. And so what you're getting is a much broader sample of opinion than you would get if you just based what you're doing on folks who decide to show up. Now, we have put a lot of resources into another online resource that I want to talk to you about for a second called speakupaustin.org. Our feeling is we're going to have our public meetings and people may engage that way, but other folks may have strong opinions and just not be able to come to the meetings. So how do we get them involved? So at Speak Up Austin, we have essentially 3 or 4 different functions. A forum is a space where we propose certain ideas or measures, and we want to gauge how popular they are. So as you can see, there are different ideas posed to the public, and if you can see the 8 votes, the 12 votes, the 5 votes, that gives you a sense of how popular a proposal might be. So an agency can propose things to the public, see what kind of traction it gets, and then decide how to proceed based on that. We also have a discussion feature where we pose a question at the top and the discussion flows as a threaded dialogue. And there's a moderator. And the moderator can intervene if the dialogue gets too spicy or if someone goes off topic. That user could be warned and then taken off the site. It also has a survey function. But the interesting thing about this is, because we require a very basic level of registration, we can contact folks topic after topic because we have a way to reach them. So we have over 3,500 registered users on this site, as well as several thousand more who have just gone on there one time to take a survey. But wouldn't it be nice, as you're thinking about doing something new in your community, to press one button, say, what do y'all think, and reach 3,500 people who have something that they want to say? Again, going above and beyond the usual suspects in your community who make the most noise. So again, this is called Speak Up Austin. Now, there are resource issues involved in what we decide to do about impaired driving and drunk driving and policy in general. So there are a number of tools out there now that essentially allow the public to get their hands dirty thinking about what to spend money on. So this one is known as Budget Allocator. Essentially, you're asked how you would spend money. You get to choose sample projects, and on the right, it's tracking your spending. And if you have spent more than what's allocated, you're forced to make a choice. Are you willing to accept some sort of a tax increase to support your choices, or do you want to scale back? And each project has that blue info button to give you more information and a gray comment button if you want to share something about that. So imagine what you could do if you got a critical mass of support behind one or two key initiatives rather than just focusing on the whole platform. If you could focus on one or two key projects and see, wow, we had 5,000 people come onto the site and 80% of them liked this one project. That's a lot of public support for that. There's another interesting phenomenon that's making waves in certain parts of the country, which is actually putting policy in draft phase online and letting folks weigh in on the policy as it's being written. Now, most of the time, the policy is being written in rooms that have a lot of smoke in them, outside of public view. And this, by the way, in cities where smoking is basically prohibited inside. So it's interesting to see what happens when you give the public access to these bills or these laws as they're in motion. Now, frankly, any politician who would be against this is taking some risk, I think you'd agree. I'm against transparency in government. That sounds bad. So imagine what would happen if people actually got to see the literal text of the law instead of it being fogged up by a bunch of rhetoric and talking points, but instead literally saw what was being proposed and got to comment on it as it was coming through. Imagine the ideas that would come out of that. Imagine the input. Imagine the insight that we would get from people who have no access to a lobbyist, who may or may not be a member of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, who may or may not have the ability to get to the Capitol, but still have something to say that is so valuable that it belongs in the bill itself. So, if you leave here today with nothing else, I would hope you would leave here with this. Those affected by your decisions should be able to affect those decisions. And the more we can involve the people who are involved in what we do, the better the result. And luckily, there are enough tools and strategies out there to involve lots and lots of people all at one time with a limited amount of investment. And it just takes a little bit of courage to step outside of your comfort zones and deal with more than just the usual suspects and see what you get from the broader general public. Does that sound appealing? Yes. You in it? Yes. You going to do it? Yes. All right. Thank you all.
We will now ask any questions from the audience.
To what degree is the identification and authentication of the users using these sites, or is it, you can just sign up, put a screen name and just go off?
So the question is, to what extent do we require folks to authenticate their use of the page before they get to use it? So it varies significantly from one page to the next. In the case of Nextdoor, there is pretty heavy levels of authentication because of the sort of underlying mission of the site to really be neighborhood specific. So as I recall, I think it even checked my credit card statement or something to say, hey, you really do live at 78723, and yes, you can be in this neighborhood. We've gone back and forth with a site like Speak Up Austin because we get people who say the more you require authentication, the less likely people are to engage. But on the other hand, if you don't require any authentication, who are we hearing from and what's going on? We ask for and usually get a lot of demographic information. And it's more important to me to know the kinds of folks that I'm hearing from in terms of what part of town they live in, what ethnicity or race are they, what income level they are, so that when I go back to the policymakers, I say, hey folks, this isn't just the usual suspect crowd. This is, look at the kinds of people that are responding to this. So it's less important to authenticate that a person really exists and know who exactly they are for me, and more to know at a higher level what kinds of folks am I hearing from so it's a diverse enough sample to be legitimate. Yes, sir. Sure.
You inspire me. I'm
Well, I
inspired
appreciate
by
that. Y'all inspire me. So.
Yeah, and I'm gonna get off my comfort zone.
Okay.
So I'm gonna see how many hands. How many of you have heard of "Please Be Kind to Cyclists"? Raise your hand. Please be kind to cyclists. Quite a bit.
Please be kind to cyclists.
Yes. And and how many of you know that that you have a Speak Up Austin is on TV? I didn't know about it. So obviously we're not using TV and radio to the best of advantage, and for you to this is great, but how many of us know about it? That is a tool for us that we can use.
Right.
So that's my.
Well, I appreciate that. I think, you know,
Thank you.
again, it comes back to thinking about how to use an existing resource in ways that you've never thought of using it before. You know, there are a lot of people who tune in to city council meetings just because they're interested in local affairs. But they might also be interested in knowing how the police cadets train to become police officers, which is a series we did on our television channel. Got a captive audience. You run it right as the council is going to break, and then you kind of tease it till, hey, watch the whole episode, you know, later on that evening. So that combined with sort of the limited attention span of the general public can really help you to drive folks to resources where they think they can dependably rely upon getting good information. And I think, at least in our case, the channel has proven itself to be time in and time out something we can turn to provide thoughtful, in-depth information and conversation. But you have to establish that. That's not going to happen, you know, overnight. The first time we did the TV town hall, it was lower attendance. We had to take some time to really build up some audience for it. So, yes, we've done 4 TV town halls on the station with an average attendance, if you take the first one out, an average attendance of about 5,000 to 6,000 for each. And that's telephone and folks in the audience. It doesn't count folks who might have just been watching. We don't have, you know, ratings the way regular TV stations do. So we don't know exactly how many people were dialed in, but at minimum that many. So. Yes, ma'am.
Given that we're here for impaired driving,
Yes, ma'am.
and we've been trying for years to get sobriety checkpoints in Texas, how can we use this to really get better information about sobriety checkpoints? From my experience of what we've seen online are a number of people who comment who have erroneous information, and what we're doing on the internet is spreading more misinformation than we are correct. So how can we get around that?
Well, that's actually, in some ways, the underpinning of our creating Speak Up Austin. In other words, people are talking about affairs related to politics already. It's not like there's no conversation happening. It's just happening based on whatever rumor or misinformation has been circulated to you via some viral video or some post that's erroneous. But when you have the opportunity to convene the conversation yourself in conjunction with a bunch of partners who can all drive audience to that one page, and you introduce it with a video or some other content that is grounded in the facts, suddenly people start to change the conversation. Now, that doesn't mean that rumors will end. That doesn't mean misinformation will stop being used. But we just feel like this site really enables us to have a little bit greater control over the conversation. Will people still post stuff on Facebook and Twitter that doesn't make sense, that isn't relevant? Of course they will. But we can use this as our official resource to inform the policymakers, and I think people gravitate towards something that they really feel is going to influence the ultimate outcome. So in conjunction with either other folks around the room or the University of Texas or other partners, you can create your own space based on the information you know to be factual. And I think that if it's done right and strategically, you get really good results out of that. Yes, ma'am.
So many of us here aren't lawmakers or politicians. How do we get those?
Bless your hearts.
How do we get those people to buy in? How do I get them to be aware of these programs and how they can be effective where we live?
Well, first of all, and maybe this sounds naive, you don't have to. In other words, I work in a council manager form of city government. I don't know if everybody's familiar with that, but essentially what that means is that the council is kind of like a board of directors, and they hire the city manager, and he runs the city, he or she. So I've never gotten council blessing for really much of anything that I do. I let them know what we're doing, but I don't go before them and ask for a vote, because I don't need it. I invite them to participate in what it is that we're doing. If I were to reach a certain expense threshold with anything that I'm doing, I would have to go get their blessing, but none of this, at least in my context, hits that at all. So that's one side of it, is figure out what can be done administratively, and I'm just being candid with you. Figure out what you can handle without needing to get fogged up with a bunch of politics. But the second thing is, these politicians are spending money on this stuff whether they know it or not, okay? When they adopt a policy that the public feels they didn't have a chance to comment on, weren't engaged about, felt was sort of, passed without them even knowing about it, they sue. They put politicians on the ballot for a recall election off cycle. They protest in the street. They spend millions and millions of public dollars that were never budgeted for that purpose. So the price for using these tools, as compared to the prices associated with dealing all of that nonsense, there's no comparison. So we're actually working on some research at UT that will really try to quantify some of that, but I would say in general terms, spend it now or spend a lot more of it later is the bottom line message. Yes, ma'am.
As being a person of higher education, how do you feel that we could maybe, I'm from a rural college, very small, how can we get the word out to our students? Obviously, those are the age demographics that we see on various slides and things like that, but coming from a small school, low income, we need help. And we would love for our students to have a voice, but again, most of the television and other things like that are going to cost us quite a bit of money.
Understood. So let me tell you a story. We undertook a comprehensive plan for the city of Austin about 4 years ago. So it's a comprehensive plan, so we really need to hear from everybody. And we were really worried about the student audience. There's, 75 to 100,000 students in the Austin area. So we just figured, what the heck, let's go show up on campus. So we parked ourselves at the West Mall of University of Texas at the lunch hour. I had two people a minute that actually stopped and did it. I don't mean passed by me. I mean 2 people that stopped and did this exercise that had nothing to do necessarily with their course material. And there's one student who will forever be indelibly placed in my mind because he was blind. And the exercise, I'm sort of embarrassed to say, was extremely visual. And he probably spent 20 to 30 minutes with one of our volunteers to finish that exercise. So, as unrocket sciencey as it is, go where they are. Talk to them right where they are. And in addition to that, find ways to link it to course credit. Can they write a paper about a public issue that requires them to go talk to their fellow students and get course credit for that? Can they be commissioned to be folks that go and canvass around the city, the broader city, for public opinion and get some course credit for that? It's not even necessarily a matter of course credit, because I was with UTSA folks this morning. They want it on their resume, okay? They want to be able to say, I worked for the city of San Antonio. I worked for the Texas Department of Transportation. Doesn't matter if it was a paid position or not. Doesn't matter if it was a formal internship or not. You did a project for them. You've got a reference. You've got someone from a major blue chip organization that will speak on your behalf. That's gold when they're looking for a job. So I don't know that the carrots are that expensive. I think they can be fairly inexpensive It just requires a little bit of creativity. Let me just close by saying that I'm the father of a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old. Thank y'all for keeping them safe. Have a good afternoon. Thanks, Larry. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you for joining us this morning. We look forward. When's your book going to be coming out?
God willing, end of 2015.
20. All right, there we go. Well, both Carl and Larry have given us a lot to think about and have showed us how collaboration can work. And one of the things I wanted to share was that Larry has also provided several documents that he's written, and we've put those on this unique thumb drive that we passed out at registration this morning. You're also going to find out as you look through here, and we'll talk more about this as we go through the day, but there's information about local traffic safety coalitions. You're going to see research reports, fact sheets, employer information. It's just full of incredible information to support impaired driving. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Those of you that are subgrantees, we've put your contact information in here so that the folks that we're partnering with, we're collaborating with, they're going to have your contact information. So we've listed all of our projects that we have for 2015 in the impaired driving area and contact information. So it's been a full and educational morning, and when we come back from lunch, we're going to hear from law enforcement about what's going on in the horizon here in Texas, using the legal system to deter impaired driving, and then also get into discussions and presentations on public education and training, how they can help us make a big difference.